So, good evening everybody and welcome to the Carlam Cymru revision sessions. Now the session this evening will focus on History A2 and will be presented by Miss Karen Thomas from e-sgol Harry Tudur. The session will last about 45 minutes and Miss Thomas will run through the relevant content with you. Now, if you have any questions during the session, please use the question and answer Q&A section within this event, and we'll do our best to answer your questions as we go along or at the end of the session. Now, today's session will be recorded, and the recording and any relevant resources will be uploaded to the e-sgol website under the Carlam Cymru tab. Now, we will put a link in a second in the Q&A section, and that's there for you to click on and leave your name and email address if you're happy to do so that we can keep in touch with you. Okay, so without further ado, over to you, Miss Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nia. The link is actually already there, so if you want to leave your email address for us to contact you about future events, then please go ahead and do so. I'm Karen Thomas. I'm going to be taking the session this evening, and Andrew Morell will be doing the last two sessions over the course of the next 2 Thursdays. So to begin with, I'm going to give a little overview of the A-level history course. So in year 13, you complete 3 units. You will do unit 3, unit 4 and unit 5. So unit 3 is the breadth study, and that is what Andrew Morell will be going through with you. You have your section A, section B and an hour 45 minutes exam. And for your section A, you would choose 1 essay from 2. And for your section B, you would do a must answer question essay. For unit 4, it's the depth study, and it's what I explained last week. I explained the question 1, the compulsory source question, and this evening I'm going to be focusing on the choice of essay from 2 that you're going to have. And the exam is another 1 hour 45 minute exam. So unit 5 is your non-examined assessment, so your controlled assessment. That is what you will do in your classroom. So 60% of the course is covered in year 13. So Andrew's session, as I said, will be next Thursday and the following Thursday, and I will be doing tonight the choice of essay from 2 that you will have in your depth study question. Now, just a reminder, all the recordings and the resources, the PowerPoints, will be put on the Carlam Cymru website. It will look a little bit like this, and we will wait for the sessions to all finish before they get uploaded, but they will be there for you to access at any point that you'd like to. So, A-level history. The presentation this evening is going to take around 40 minutes, and if you have any questions, as Nia said, submit them using the Q&A function during the presentation, and then I will go over as many as I can live in the last 5 minutes. So what we're going to do tonight. So today we're going to start with looking at exam feedback. It's really, really important we look at what the examiners have to say for the previous year's students. So we'll be looking back at the summer 22 feedback and the WJAC expectations. We'll be looking at a mark scheme overview, looking specifically at the top bands, that's band 6 and band 5. I'll be looking through some layout and styles of different essay questions with you, and also looking at some essay planning techniques that you may want to use. If we have time, we will hopefully have a bit of time at the end, and I will go over the question 1, the source skills that we looked at last week, and reissue the source checklist that we went through as well. So tonight's session is going to be sort of looking at essay skills from previous units that you've done in history, and also a refresh on your source skills from our last session. So it's going to be a mix of new ideas with some thoughts and ideas that you hopefully already have on the course. So we're fully aware of how unit 4 is set out. The question 1 is your compulsory source-based question, no choice, you have to do that question. And your question 2 or 3, you have to choose which one you would prefer, is an essay. So it will all lead to that 1 hour 45 minute exam at the end of year 13 this summer for you. So you have 8 depth study topic areas, and every school or college will choose one of these depth study topic areas to look into. Now, basically, the depth study means that you have to go into it in a lot of detail. So your time frame is relatively short. OK, so part 1 is what you studied in year 12, and then part 2 is what you then go on and look at in year 13, building on what you've done in year 12. So you may be doing depth study topic area 1, which is challenges facing Mary and Elizabeth, or you're possibly doing Civil War, Commonwealth and Protectorate. You could be doing part 2, protests and campaigns for social reform, or maybe the economic and social challenges in Wales and England. You could be doing the spread of Protestantism and Counter-Reformation, or maybe France, Republic and Napoleon, 1792 to 1815. Or you could be doing one of these last two, which are the Part 2, Civil War and Reconstruction, or Nazi Germany, 1933 to 45. Now, Nazi Germany and the Germany sort of topic areas is a very, very popular one. A lot of exam boards will do that, and a lot of schools and colleges do that one. But I've taken examples from all of the 8 topic areas for this presentation tonight, because it's important, obviously, for you to learn the skills of how to answer the questions, and then those skills can be applied to any topic that you actually do. So also remember that this is a depth study, so you will need to know your content inside and out. So make sure you know and understand the key issue and the content in your specification. Now I've got a link there for the WJEC site. This link will take you straight through to the list of specifications, the 8 of them that I've just run through, and you can click on that and download your specification for the topic that you were doing. So if you are doing depth study 1, it will look like this. Okay, you've got your concepts and perspectives, and then the key issue and the content on the right hand side. And it looks, the layout is exactly the same. Okay, this is depth study 3, and you can see it's laid out exactly the same with concepts and perspectives, and then the key issue and content. And you should know everything on that specification. Obviously, we're sort of like 3/4 of the way through the course at the moment, aren't we? So you might not have covered everything on your specification, but you should be able to see whereabouts you are and how much more you've got left to do. So it's really important that you know everything that's on your particular specification. So let's have a look at what the examiners had to say for that question 2/3 essay question from the candidates who sat the exam last year in 2022. We as teachers and lecturers will look at this at the start of the year so that we know how to advise students who are studying that particular topic area in that new year. So the first thing they said was that there was a slightly new layout of the paper, and that happened in 2022, and the examiners felt students had coped with it really well, and they're going to continue to use that slightly different layout of paper again for this year. For question 2/3, the only change is that the numbering for those 2 questions are put into boxes. Nothing else has changed. There were a few more changes as I went through last week in last week's presentation for that question 1 source, compulsory source question. But for this one, there are very few changes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The second thing they wanted to remind candidates was that the grade boundaries change yearly. So what makes an A star or an A grade will change the following year. They also wanted candidates to know that they wanted a sustained debate throughout the essay. So what that means is they want you to focus on the question, and they want you to focus on your argument and your debate right the way through. So making it clear in your introduction how you're going to be sort of putting your essay together, what you're going to be looking at, and keeping to that all the way through the essay. The fourth thing they wanted to make clear was that in conclusion, you need to come to a judgment. If your question has a judgment that is required in it, you will have to give that judgment. Sometimes judgments will come naturally all the way through the essay, but they will definitely need a judgment at the very end. And I'll explain that as we go through the style of the essays that we look at in a minute. Okay, so it is worth 30 marks, and we know now exactly what this question is. It's going to be an essay question. So we're going to focus first of all on the essay skills that you will need to give this answer a good go. Now, I've got 2 examples to show you here. This is from depth study 1, and this is showing you the layout of the paper. Okay, as we know, there were bigger changes to that source question, and this will stay the same for you now this year. The question appears at the start, okay, for the sources. And it starts with using your understanding, and then you have your attribution, where the sources come from, and it's information first, and then you have your source. And then right at the end, you will have your 2 essays. And as you can see, we can tell this is a 2022 paper because the 2 questions there have got the boxes around them, but that's the only difference. Okay, so that's depth study 1 example, and I've got a depth study 8 here, exactly the same layout, and you can see the essay questions have got those boxes around them. Now, just because the exam layout has changed slightly, it doesn't mean that you can't use past papers. Quite the opposite. Please go on the WJC site. I've got a link that will come up a bit later, and download past paper questions to practice. They are still valid. They are still really, really relevant to have a good practice on. So this is an example from Depth Study 1, obviously pre-2022, because they haven't got the boxes around those numbers. Okay, but they're still useful. So find the past papers for your particular depth study and feel free to have a go at them, give them to your teacher or lecturer to have a check to see how you're getting on with answering past paper questions. So we've got another example here from depth study 6. Now then, the mark scheme overview. It's really important that you know what examiners use and what your teachers or lecturers use to mark your essays, because you can see then what you are expected to do. So this is the mark scheme for your question 2/3. And obviously I showed you this with question 1 last week as well, but it was a slightly different mark scheme, of course, because you've got different skills and they are looking for different things in that question compared to this question. So you had 3 columns in question 1 to focus on. This mark scheme for question 2/3, you have 4 columns. Okay, so let's have a little look at them and zoom in. So at the top, it explains that you're focusing on AO1. Don't need to worry about that. It's just saying that's the skill that's being tested in this particular question. So you need to demonstrate, organise and communicate knowledge and understanding to analyse and evaluate the key features related to the periods studied, making substantiated judgments and exploring concepts as relevant of cause, consequence, change, continuity, similarity, difference, and significance. There's quite a lot there. Okay, so if you break that down, this is how the mark scheme has broken down what you need to do into the different elements. Now, I'm only going to focus on band 5 and band 6. Okay, so the higher end of the essay bands. So with the first column, which is analysis and evaluation, if we look at band 5 first, they're sort of going to be given between 21 and 25 marks for a band 5, which is an excellent essay if you get into that sort of area of band. The learner is able to clearly analyse and evaluate the key issues in relation to the set question. So you are focusing in on the question that they are asking you, and you're clearly analysing that question, and all your information that you're given is focused in on it. For the band 6, the learner is able to effectively analyse and evaluate the key issue in relation to the set question. So instead of the word clearly, you've got effectively in that particular top band. Then they want you obviously to give judgments. I mentioned that from the examiner's report at the very beginning. So for band 5, there is a clear attempt to reach a substantiated judgment which is supported. And as I said, these judgments could come at the end of paragraphs. They definitely need to come in your conclusion. They could even come in your introduction when you set out where you're going with your essay and what you're going to be talking about and explaining. With regards to band 6, a focused, sustained and substantiated judgment is reached. So it was clear in band 5, it is focused again in band 6. Knowledge for band 5, the learner is able to demonstrate and organise accurate and relevant historical knowledge of the period studied. And for the band 6, the learner is able to demonstrate, organise and communicate accurate knowledge, which shows clear understanding of the period study. So you've got that clarity sort of coming through in that top band. And then the last section, which is communication. So for band 5, the learner is able to communicate accurately and fluently using appropriate language and structure with a high degree of accuracy. And for the band 6, the learner is able to communicate clearly and fluently using appropriate language and structure with a high degree of accuracy in a response which is coherent, lucid, concise, and well constructed. So lucid means you are able to carry it through right the way through your essay. It's concise, it's accurate, it's well constructed. So just bear in mind maybe the top areas that you should be focusing on: analysis and evaluation, judgment, putting in the knowledge, and communicating as clearly as you can. There's a little point at the bottom I just want to draw your attention to. It says candidates will be rewarded for making connections and comparisons between elements of both parts of the depth study where relevant. So that basically means if you have, if you're making a point which you could bring in some year 12 perhaps knowledge into your essay, then you are able to do so if it is relating to the point that you are making. Don't bring in things just because you remember them. It is only if there's something in your year 12 work, your unit 2 work, that you think could be applied into this unit 4 work, then that can happen if it is suitable and relevant. So some common terminology. So this question is based on AO1, as we saw from the mark scheme. And one of the things you need to look at before you start your revision and before you start your exam prep is the use of the command terminology that is used for AO1 questions. So when you have an essay, very often they will use the same sorts of commands in the essay questions, and you need to look out for those commands because that gives you the instruction of what you're meant to do with that particular essay. So there are 6 command terms that you need to be aware of. Okay, and the top bit there is just saying exactly the same as what I've just said. Okay, so to answer the question effectively, you need to look out for these so you know what to do with that particular essay. So you could have a discuss question. Okay, that's one of the 6. If you do, what it means is you focus on the main idea that they give you in the question and you make an argument that considers it in relation to other factors that you may think of. And your aim is to make a consistent and balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence. So that's number 1, discuss. You could have an evaluate question. Okay, so what does that mean? It means you focus on the main idea in the question, so exactly the same as discuss, but this time you weigh up its impact and or role against other relevant factors. So you have to compare a little bit with something else. Your aim is to make a consistent and balanced judgment, that keyword again, that is supported by factual evidence. So there's a little bit more to do and evaluate because you need to weigh up its impact and evaluate it against something else. You may have a how effective or how effectively style question. So you focus on the main idea in the question again, you make a judgment on its effectiveness and you weigh it up against other factors that may have been equally more or less effective. So you would be given your judgment at that point. Your aim is to make a consistent, balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence. You might have a how significant question. So again, you focus on the main idea that they give you in that essay and you make a judgment on its significance, its importance, and you consider it in relation to other factors that may have been equally more or less significant. So again, you aim to make a consistent and balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence that you bring into your essay. You might have how successful or how successfully, and this means you look at the main idea in the question and you make a judgment on the level of its success, and then you weigh it up against other factors that may have been equally more or less successful, and then you give that really important, consistent, balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence that you bring into your answer. And then the last one, the last possible essay stem that you could have is to what extent. So here you will focus on the main idea in the question again that they give you. You make your judgment on its importance. You will weigh it up against other factors that may have been equally more or less important, and you explain that. And then, sorry, just going a bit fast then, and you make a consistent and balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence. So what I've got on the next few slides are some examples that I've found of discussed questions, evaluate how effectively questions, how significant, to what extent, and how successful. Now, it doesn't matter if these are from different depth studies. What is important is you can see how they're putting them together and how you could perhaps think about, if that was a style of question that was applied to my depth study, how I would go about answering it. So this is from Depth Study 2, 2017. The Royalist defeat in the Civil War was mainly due to superior parliamentary resources. Discuss. I've got another discuss here. This is from Depth Study 5 in 2019. Calvin was more influential than Luther in the spread of the Reformation in Europe between 1531 and 1564. Discuss. Now you need to pick out the key words in these questions, okay? You've obviously got that command term, the discuss, you can see that straight away, but you've also got the keywords and you have key dates, okay? In that bottom one especially, that's the area of time, the period of time that they want you to focus in on. Let's do some more. So we've got Depth Study 3 here, 2018. To what extent this time were the social reforms implemented between 1833 and 1848 mainly influenced by humanitarian concerns? Again, you've got your time frame, okay? You've got your question, to what extent, and you have the areas that you have to look into, the social reforms, and did they influence humanitarian concerns? How far do you agree that Sir Robert Peel was a successful leader of the Tory party in the period 1834 to 1846? We got a Depth Study 8 here from 2019. Lots of schools, as I said at the beginning, do this particular topic area. How far do you agree that Goering's four-year plan was the most significant development in the Nazi economic policy in the period 1933 to 45? So you've got how far do you agree? Okay, you've got your issue that you've got to zoom in on, Goering's four-year plan. Was it the most significant? You need a judgment on that in the Nazi economic policy between those timeframes. Another one here, we've got 2017 Depth Study 4. How far do you agree that the collapse of Lloyd George's coalition in 1922 was the most important political change between 1918 and 1939? Now you'll see all of these essays are worth 30 because the source analysis question number 1 is 30 marks and so is your essay, okay? We've got Depth Study 5 here, which is 2019. How far do you agree that the success of Lutheranism between 1531 and 1555 was due to the problems facing Charles V? Depth Study 7 here, to what extent was President Grant mainly responsible for the failure of Reconstruction in the period 1865 to 1877? Now that you're seeing all of these questions, you could perhaps make a question up from part of the module that you've already covered and by using these sort of stems of the question to practice. That's really good revision. So you've got 2017 Depth Study 4 here. How far do you agree that the collapse of Lloyd George's coalition in 1922 was the most important political change between 1918 and 1939? So think about what would you be zooming into if this was a question that you had, okay? Obviously the dates, your time frame, obviously that question, okay, how far do you agree? They need that judgment. Was it the most important political change? That needs to be addressed. And was it Lloyd George's coalition or was it something else? You need to think of other things to base your essay on as an argument. We've got Depth Study 2 here, 2019. To what extent did the Labour movement have the most significant impact on the growth of radicalism in the period 1642 to 1660? Now remember, with your essay, you're only going to have 45 minutes to do your essay. So you need to be thinking about which one you want to choose. And you also need to be thinking about planning it and then going ahead and obviously writing it out. So what I've done here is listed those 6 questions, command questions that you would have in an essay, and I put it in this table, which makes it a lot more clearer to sort of look at, okay? Every question, if you start with discuss, needs to focus on the main idea in the question. That runs through them all, look, okay? You can see that. You need to focus on the information that they give you and give as much detail and information as you can on that particular topic area. You then need to consider, if you did the discuss, the idea in relation to other factors, okay? And that comes through if you look down all the way through as well. And you need consistent and balanced judgments, which are supported by factual evidence. Now, if you had evaluate, okay, you would do exactly the same, focus on that main idea, but then you would need to weigh up its impact against other relevant factors, okay, and obviously give the judgment. With regards to effective, significant, successful, and to what extent, you would need to weigh it up or consider it against the other factors and then give judgments supported by factual evidence. So now you can see how these sort of questions, the command terms, work in these essays and what they are expecting from you, depending on which essay they ask of you this summer. So these are a few suggestions now and top tips for answering the essay question. It comes from the WJC. So what they suggest you do first, just like your sources, you start with underlining or highlighting what you think the key aspects of the question are. So the example that's here is Mary I's marriage to Philip of Spain was mainly responsible for the challenges she faced during her reign, 1553 to 1558. Discuss. Okay, so highlighted there would be the command term, which is discuss, the focus of the question, which is Mary's marriage to Philip and how that contributed to the challenges that she faced. Now, it's good to remember that you should tackle the main focus by considering it in relation to other relevant factors. You need to provide the consistent and balanced judgment that they're crying out for and support it with factual evidence. Okay, so you've highlighted what you need to focus on in that question, and you know the time period as well that is there in the question. So when it comes to planning your response, okay, you need time to plan, okay, and you need to think about how you're going to answer the question, plan it out, because in your introduction you want to be very clear in how you're taking that essay through and what you're going to be commenting on. So once you've highlighted the key elements and the command term in the question and you know exactly where you're going to go, you need to plan. Now you may have your own method, or maybe your teachers are able to recommend something that suits your particular learning style. But it can be helpful to try different things until you find a planning way for essays that suits you. So what I'm going to suggest to you this evening, you might already have an alternative style that suits you. But this is a way that I feel that I would want to plan my essay, because it's brief, you're using notes, and then with different questions, you could slightly amend it to suit the different questions that might come up. So for this particular question, Mary's marriage to Philip, and was it responsible for the challenges she faced during her reign? We're going to just draw a simple table, okay, and then add headings that fit the question. So because there are sort of three things that we are focusing in on here, the challenge, the evidence, and was it responsible, then those could be the start of our headings. And then simple brief notes under each of those would suffice to do a plan in order to use it for your essay. So let me explain what I mean. So you could have the challenge, the evidence, who was responsible. And this simple plan with just little key words would be enough for you to remember and trigger you off to write a much more detailed paragraph. But you've got your challenge, you'd use the one first that's been given to you in your essay. So obviously it's marriage in this particular question. What evidence would you use? So maybe a word or two to remind you of where you're going to go with that point of view. And then a judgment. Was it responsible? Well, yes, it was. You could just put a Y to keep your notes as brief as possible. But especially when it was linked to, and you'd give more evidence to back up your point of view. You then think of another challenge, okay, and maybe something else, and then something else. If you could think of 3 or 4 challenges, great, okay. And then in the evidence section, give the briefest of notes, keywords, why you're going to take the essay this particular way. That will help you then to formulate your introduction, because you'll be able to plan out and say where you're going with this essay in your introduction, all the different signposts for the different paragraphs, and then you've got your evidence that you would go into when you got to that point in your essay to give the detail, and then you've got your judgment. Yes, it was responsible. No, it wasn't, but it led to this, or it was partially responsible. You've got that judgment at the very end as well. That would give you a really, really good essay, okay? So this is just one idea that you might want to take away and use yourself. You could take it a step further, okay, and maybe highlight how far the responsibilities went. So if it strongly supported, you use one colour, if it didn't, in another. The other thing you could do there is just put a tick or a cross if it did, you know, if it was very, very strong. If it wasn't, that could be used as well. But it's up to you, okay? This is just a plan that I think would suit me if I had to plan an essay. When it comes to answering the question, obviously that little brief process of making the notes and clearly thinking out how you're going to take this essay forward should now enable you to pull together an argument that you can then put forward clearly and confidently. Because that's, if you remember back to the mark scheme, that's what the examiners want from you. So they want you to state your opinion straight away. They don't want you to hide it till the conclusion. They want to know in that opening paragraph where you are going, what sort of things are you going to be talking about in your essay, what you're going to be supporting it with, and what they're debating alternative views, and a judgment in that introduction if you can as well. So this is an example. Although the reign of Mary I was relatively short, it was certainly not a reign without incident. From the outset, with the situation following her brother's death, she was faced with many challenges, and while her marriage to Philip II of Spain was very problematic for her reign, it was not the main reason for the challenge that she would endure. Instead, and obviously you could go on and signpost where else you were going in that introduction, what else you were going to be discussing in your essay, and that would be clearly laid out in your introduction. A little tip, use the question, okay, in your introduction and in the paragraphs, subsequent paragraphs that you write your essay, and follow the plan with your essay, but use those words from that question. It shows the examiner that you are referring back to the question, that you're sticking to it. So that's really, really important. It's a bit of a top tip. Okay, so no matter what approach you take, okay, however you plan your essay, if you've got your own technique, great, but your plan will be able to guide you through the response and ensure that you continue to be focused on the set question. So whichever of these assessment objective 1 questions you select to do, the issues that you must always bear in mind are: you focus on the set question, and this has come from the WJC now, okay? You organise your arguments logically so that they form a coherent response. You debate the question as prompted by the command term. So, for example, when asked to what extent, you must focus on the main idea in the question and make a judgment on its importance, and you must weigh it up against other factors that may have been equally more or less important, and remember to give that judgment. Your aim is to make a consistent and balanced judgment that is supported by factual evidence. Now, whether or not you make little judgments throughout your response, you absolutely must provide a conclusion that draws together the arguments in your response and offers a final and definitive answer to the set question. So I don't think they could be much clearer than that. So what we've got here is the Depth Study 8 2019 question. Okay, so we've got to what extent, okay, for the top one there. So remember, you'd focus on the main idea in the question and you'd make a judgment on its importance. So it says, to what extent was propaganda mainly responsible for maintaining popular support for the Nazi regime between 1933 and 45? So you know your theme is popular support, but you know that propaganda is what you need to focus on, okay? So to what extent was propaganda responsible for popular support? Or was it something else? So you'd focus on propaganda, think through what other things could come in there, and then be able to, in your introduction, mention them and go into more detail further on. That means you're weighing it up against the other factors that may have been equally more or less important in your eyes, and you've got your consistent balanced judgment then, supported by factual evidence all the way through. We've got at the bottom here, how far do you agree that Goering's 4-year plan was the most significant development in Nazi economic policy in the period 33 to 45? So the timeframes on both of these questions actually cover the whole of the sort of year 13 timeframe, which is great. So you've got that wide open. But for this one, how far do you agree? You've got to give that judgment. Do you agree with it? How far? Goering's 4-year plan was the most significant development in the Nazi economic policy. So you need to look at the economic policy, you need to suss out Goering's 4-year plan, or was it something else? Okay, so to what extent, focus on the main question, make a judgment on its significance, consider it to other factors that may be equally more or less significant, and consistent balanced judgments needed throughout, supported by factual evidence. Okay, so with those two particular questions, I thought it would be useful for you to have the mark scheme that went with it. Now, I'm not going to go through this. As I said at the beginning, tonight's presentation will be put online, so you can obviously download it at a later date and go through this when you have more time. And also the recording will be there as well, so you could pause it and actually take time to read through it. Okay, see if you would have put the same information as the mark scheme here suggests it will be looking for. So this is the question, the 4-year plan question. Now, think about the mark scheme, okay? We left this right at the very beginning, but we mustn't forget it, okay? You need analysis and evaluation in your essays. You need judgments. You need to put in accurate and detailed knowledge, and you need to communicate everything clearly. And remember as well, if there's a point you're making that brings in something from year 12, then you are able to bring that point in if it is of relevance. So what we have here is the 2022 exams. This is what was set last summer for the students in year 13 last year. So we've got the 2 questions there. Okay, to what extent did the Nazi regime maintain control over the German people during the period 33 to 45? And we've got the Nuremberg laws were the most significant development in Nazi racial policy. Discuss. Okay, so again, we've got the to what extent, and here we've got the discussed significance. So again, I put the mark scheme in. You can pause this and have a good look at it in your own time. So for all WJC past papers and mark schemes, you can follow this link. Okay, find the depth study that you do. They are all there. I suggest you have a good go at them. When you've got the 2 essays, you're obviously going to decide which one you would prefer to do, and ask yourself, is there a reason why you're choosing the one that you're choosing? Is it because you know nothing on the other one? It may be that we haven't got to that point in the course yet, which is fine. But if it has been studied, then maybe if you didn't want to do it, do you need to do a bit more revision on that area maybe? But the link is there and you can go through and download your own past papers to have a practice on. So essay skills done. What I'm going to do now in the last few minutes is revisit our last session on the question 1 main points that we did. So if you remember, the paper changed last summer, so it looks like this now. So as opposed to this, which was pre-2022. So instead of having the sources in boxes, we have the sources just with the source A, B and C, the attribution above it, and the question, which has changed slightly, starts with using your understanding, and that's at the start, as opposed to at the end, as they used to be, which the question used to read with reference to the sources and your understanding. But remember what I said last week, you just need to cut that bit out and just go with using your understanding. You can still use the past paper questions for this section just by changing that beginning bit of the question. Okay, so this is just reiterating what I've just said. You can still use the old papers. So remember the mark scheme for this, it's slightly different because obviously the focus is different. So this is AO2 and you are looking at the value of sources, and we looked at the band 6 in particular last week, and the analysis and evaluation of them in their context and the focus on the question set. So you've got the 2 mark schemes now in this one presentation that you can go back on. Now, remember, you need to give judgments, you need to look at the value of the sources, you need to look at the content, the provenance, the tone, and the context of all of these. And using a checklist like this is obviously really, really useful. Now, remember, you don't want to analyse your sources in a very structured way where you do one, then the other, then the other. It needs to flow. Yes, all of these need to be addressed, but you don't do it in a prescribed way. You need to let your writing flow and your analysis flow. Okay, so obviously discuss all of these, but don't do it in a structured way. Remember as well to use the word objective or subjective. So objective is a source which informs, it means it's balanced and factual rather than biased and opinionated, and subjective refers to information that's based on personal opinions. Remember, you will be spending some time doing notes around your sources, so use your highlighting and underlining of notes, okay? Remember to use, if there's any negatives with the source, we will treat with caution, because if there are any limitations or biases in particular sources. But remember, they will never just put sources in that have no use. They will all have a value, and you just need to find each source's value. So it's absolutely essential, at least once, that you write the source is of value to an historian studying. And the same thing as the essay, use the question, okay? Make sure you are referring to that question in your answer. And even if you struggle to actually understand the source, a decent comment on what gives the source value will get you potentially 20 out of 30. Make sure you do a conclusion on the collective value. So collectively, the sources are of value to an historian studying whatever the topic is. And as I said earlier, all the sources will have a value. You need to figure it out. General do's and don'ts. Don't assess and trawl through them sequentially, as I just mentioned. You have to comment on more than just the content. You have to comment on more than just the attribution, the bit of information that they give. Don't copy long sections of the sources out. There's absolutely no need. No need for long historical introduction or any irrelevant background material either. You don't need to rank the sources and address the question as much as you can in your answer. Now here I've given some possible sentence starters which you could develop to use yourselves for an introduction. So those are the introduction ones. Again, I'm not going to read through them now because you can obviously do that in your time, and they are on the first PowerPoint as well that I put together last week. Your main body, some excellent sentence starters there that you could develop, and some extra contextual sentence starters, value ones and limitation ones that you might want to bear in mind if you had to add a bit extra to your source analysis. In your conclusion, remember to compare the evidence across all of the sources. Okay, so you've got your different conclusions there that you can develop again, but you were basically saying that the sources on their own are quite limited really, okay, but when you put them together, they're obviously going to be giving you a much more balanced overview, much more valuable to you as a historian. So something along those lines is what you need to definitely put across in your conclusion. Now remember, additional knowledge on the topic, there is a need for appropriate reference to the historical context if it is linked to the source, but there is no marks for a display of knowledge, so there's no point putting in everything you know. It has to refer to the point that you were making in that particular source. The other thing is, just like the essays, you can obviously use things from year 12 if you feel it is of relevance to the point that you're making in the source analysis. Now, again, I've included these that we spent a lot of time on last week. These are the source analysis that we did. OK, so again, they are here. You can pause the PowerPoint at a later date or download the presentation and go through them yourselves. OK, so some common student questions that I frequently get asked in class. And will we ever get more than 3 sources to evaluate? No. OK, you will only have the 3 sources for your question 1. You may have a picture source or a map, but normally they are written sources. Can I use some of your suggestions of sentence starters and mix them with my own wording? Absolutely. OK, that's what they're there for. They are to be used by you to develop them into better, longer, more detailed, but they're a starting point. Will we ever have secondary sources? No, you won't. The sources will always be primary and they will always be contemporary for question 1 from the type. So this is another list, a bit like the checklist of everything that you need to do with the sources. Now, hopefully this has refreshed your memory of what we did last week. So I've got a little quiz just to end, just for you to test your understanding of what we've gone over today, and what we went over last week. So for the essay that we did today, the choice of either question 2 or question 3. So you have to do 2 essays. Well, hopefully you now realise, no, that's false. You will only do the 1 essay that you choose to do. There is no need to plan your answer. That is big false, isn't it? OK, I've showed you that you need to plan because in your introduction, you need to show where you're going with that particular essay. So you need to plan it out. You need to focus on the command word. Absolutely. OK, you know the 6 command words now that these essays could come under. In your essay, you should state your opinion, support it, and debate alternative views. That's true. OK, you need to do that. You should provide a consistent and balanced judgment and support it with factual evidence. That's true as well. So very quickly, let's just go over question 1, OK, that we did the refresh on this evening. So you will always have 3 sources. That's true. The sources may be secondary. I'm hoping you're all shouting false to that one. You need to mention the tone of the source. Yes, you do. Put as much additional information as you can into your source analysis. No, that's false, okay? You don't need additional information unless it's of relevance to the point that you're making. There are no extra marks for knowledge and understanding or extra knowledge and understanding. It's good to write a pre-learned, very structured and formulated source analysis. That's false, isn't it? Okay, we need to cover all those things in the checklist, but they need to flow. Okay, so next steps for question 2 or 3. So I would suggest you go on the WJC site and you look at all the essays that have been set for your depth study, even looking at some from the other studies and see how they're laid out. Which essay in each year would you choose, either that question 2 or question 3? And as I said earlier, if you're choosing one or the other, is there a reason for that? Do you need some extra additional revision in a certain area? Have a go at the question, use the techniques, the planning technique that I gave today, or maybe one that you've already mastered, and time yourself answering the question. And also look up the mark schemes on the WJC site and compare your answer to the mark scheme. Would you have mentioned the things that are on the mark scheme? And I've got a link there for you to head off to past papers to have a look. Now, next steps for the question 1, okay, ensure you understand the specification, and that obviously applies to this question, the essay question that we've done tonight as well. Practice the techniques given to you to evaluate your depth study sources, and time yourself writing up your notes, okay, you're highlighting and underlining. 10 to 15 minutes is what we recommend for your evaluations and making your notes. 45 minutes to write up, and the same for the essay, 45 minutes in whole for the essay then, okay? So we have now done the source skills and we've done the essay skills. In next week's session, Andrew will be focusing on the breadth study and he'll be focusing on concepts, and the week after it'll be unit 3 again and reviewing a good essay. So thank you very much for joining this session tonight. I hope that my 2 sessions have been of some help. Good luck with any mocks that you have coming up or any external exams, and good luck in the summer for the summer series as well. Don't forget, all of these recordings and resources, once the set of 4 have gone through, they will be put online and you'll be able to access them there through the Carolyn Cymru tab. Now, if you have any questions, I will now be available to answer them on the Q&A function. We are almost up on time, so I'll have a quick look and see if there are any there. Bye.